a hard time with life.
Linkin Park.
Linkin Park.
Linkin Park.
Linkin Park.
Let's be honest, if you were born in the late 80s or 90s, Linkin Park was religion. Their sound was a war cry. For every pissed off, misunderstood kid with an MP3 player and too many feelings, they battled through personal demons and public expectations to make music that actually meant something. And Chester Bennington bled through the speakers to give voice to the unheard and the outcasts. And then he suddenly died and ripped a hole in the soul of a generation. So let's crack open the albums that bear his voice and guts and see how Linkin Park kept breaking their own mold, dragging rock into a new era. Let me hit you with a cold, hard fact about hybrid theory. This beast went fucking diamond. That's right, 10 million units. That's Metallica and Van Halen territory. And Linkin Park did it with their debut.
I remember we were on tour and they told us that the album was the best-selling album in the world, is what our manager said. And we were like, oh yeah, like in the world. He's like, no, literally in the world. It's the best-selling album on the planet.
Think about that. A bunch of emotional wrecks with turntables, distortion pedals, and something to scream about took over the goddamn world and hijacked the 2000s, becoming one of the most important albums of the 21st century, period. Keep in mind, back then the music scene was a chaotic mosh pit of boy bands, pop princesses, and the lingering scent of grunge's flannel shirts.
So Hybrid Theory first record was the biggest record on the planet that year. And that was a year when it was like Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera and Justin Timberlake and NSYNC or whatever. I don't remember exactly all of the ones that were in the conversation at the time. But we saw them as like huge pop artists. We didn't see ourselves that way at all. And when we got the data back or the results back of like they're saying, you add up all the numbers, like you guys are bigger than them on the planet Earth. And we were like, that doesn't make any sense.
In the beginning, Mike Shinoda and Brad Delson weren't obvious rock messiahs. More like two nerdy kids who loved Snoop Dogg as much as Metallica. Along with their buddy Rob Borden, they formed the band Zero and jammed in Shinoda's bedroom, which Mike rigged into a makeshift studio with a 4-track recorder. Shinoda was the visionary, a Japanese-American art school kid with formal piano training and a knack for tech. After high school, he even enrolled in art college to study graphic design, taking classes with DJ Joe Hahn.
Joe and I met at art school. So Joe was like, from aesthetic point of view, and I mean aesthetic in terms of culture, he was my guy. Like we were all, we'd say an artist's name or like a painter or a graphic designer or like another band who has a cool vibe, and we'd be like, yeah, that's so cool. And the other guys are like, I don't know what you're talking about.
And he did.
But Mike's true calling was music.
If I only did one thing in the band, it'd be write and produce. That'd be my core thing.
Okay.
Brad Delson was the guitar nerd to Mike Shinoda's beat-obsessed brain.
Brad was very strategic, has always been very strategic and organized. He actually has trouble sometimes getting out of that frame of mind and getting into just like a wildly creative frame of mind. He's very left-brainy that way. So he's especially when it comes to like legal stuff and whatever.
The left-brain strategist of the band, Brad studied communications at UCLA and roomed with bassist Dave Farrell. But more crucially, he interned at Zomba Music, where he learned the industry ropes from none other than Vice President Jeff Blue. I actually made a whole separate video diving into that story. But for now, here's the short version. Jeff Blue gave Zero a publishing development deal.
When we got signed, it was really like basically like a development deal. Like it was like a wait and see kind of situation. I don't think we really knew that when we signed it. I wasn't fully aware that that's what was going on. So the more we recorded, the more we wrote, the more we recorded, and honestly, the more we stuck to our guns and said, because there were we would get suggestions from the label about doing things differently. And usually we told them no.
In 1997, they cranked out a 4-track demo in Mike's bedroom studio and passed it around to anyone who'd give it a listen. But no one wanted to distribute it. The band played showcase after showcase, only to be met with silence or polite rejection. By late 1998, their vocalist at the time, Mark Wakefield, had enough. And so, burned out by the lack of momentum, he left the band to pursue other projects. With no frontman, Zero was on life support. The band needed a new voice, and fast.
We went through a period where we kind of didn't know what we wanted to do with the band. Like the singer we had been playing with was transitioning out, and we didn't know if we wanted to continue. If we wanted to continue, if we wanted to continue just the 5 guys, or how that would even look or work out.
So that's when Jeff Blue reached out to a singer he knew from Arizona, Chester Bennington.
Yeah, I remember getting a call from a friend of mine who used to represent an old band of mine, saying that, there was this great young group of guys that had this really great sound, and all they needed was that voice that was going to help them complete the puzzle.
Burned out from his own stalled band, Chester saw this as a lifeline. Legend has it that he skipped his own birthday party, flew to Los Angeles, and auditioned to join the band.
And, I had never really auditioned. The only time I'd ever auditioned to be in a band was when I was like 14. And so from 14 to 23, I had never auditioned. I was always the person that people were coming to audition for. And so it was a different experience for me, because in my mind, I was like doing these guys a favor.
The second Mike Shinoda heard him, he knew this was the guy.
Long story short, he ends up in LA and he tries out. Well, we had lined up a few different tryouts that day, and because we didn't know what the hell we were doing, like they were seeing each other on the way in and out, which is not a very nice thing to do. I wouldn't have done it that way if I were to do it today. But the guy who was trying out after Chester heard Chester sing, and then he came in and he was basically like, I don't know if he said it to us or if he said it to Chester. He's like, if they don't pick you, they're crazy. Like one of the guys actually left. I think it was that guy. He just came in and he was like, I'm not even trying out. Like, if you guys don't pick that guy, you're insane. And he left and he told Chester the same thing.
The band signaled this fresh start with a name change, Linkin Park. By October 2000, they already completed their debut album, Hybrid Theory. The music packed all the desperation, fury, and heart that the 6 members had been bottling up. The song Crawling, for instance, tackled the toxic cycle of feeling like a prisoner in your own skin, a reflection of Chester's battles with abuse and addiction.
For a short song, that really packs a punch. And knowing what ends up, afflicting Chester until he takes his own life. Crawling in my skin, these wounds, they will not heal. Fear is how I fall, confusing what is real. Wow, that's a powerful, powerful lyric, y'all, and a powerful bit of songwriting. What I'm meaning by it's a razor's edge. He's on the 5th of that key, the G sharp, and he just keeps going back and forth from a G sharp to an A. And it's either out of touch or back in on that nice 5th, or a dissonance or back into it, right? That half step is like, which way am I going? It's unsteady, it's unsturdy.
But Hybrid Theory wasn't a depressing record. It was an explosion of pent-up emotion that somehow felt universal. Everyday emotions that fans everywhere could relate to, whether it was alienation, anger, or hope. No one could have predicted how big this thing would blow up. Hybrid Theory was inescapable. Singles like One Step Closer, Crawling, and In the End were on constant rotation on rock radio and MTV.
Like TRL and MTV and all of those things that surrounded it seemed so big and pervasive.
The record went multi-platinum within months, ultimately selling over 10 million copies in the US, earning a rare diamond certification, and north of 20 million worldwide.
So the production is great, and the shifts of tone they pull off brilliantly.
After the massive success of Hybrid Theory, Linkin Park had two choices: stick to the formula or take a risk. Obviously, they chose the second. Instead of copy and pasting their own debut album, they took it apart and rebuilt it from scratch. And in July 2002, they released the remix album Reanimation, packed with wild collaborations and new sounds. This was a warning shot. Linkin Park wasn't here to be predictable. They were here to burn the blueprint. So they brought in heavy hitters. Jonathan Davis from Korn added his signature growl, while Black Thought from The Roots dropped bars. The Humble Brothers and Amp Live mixed in some electronic chaos. And ultimately, we got an album that truly tore down genre walls.
And then the record, we did things our way, we fought for our way, put the album out our way, and it worked.
Reanimation hit hard right out of the gate. It debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200, moving nearly 270,000 copies in its first week. Crazy numbers for a remix album, but it didn't stop there. It became the 4th best-selling remix album of all time, right behind legends like Michael Jackson, Madonna, and the Beatles. But success is dangerous. It makes bands lazy, soft, and predictable. Yet, Linkin Park didn't flinch and released Meteora in March 2003. The album's name came from a stunning spot in Greece where ancient monasteries sit high up on massive rock towers. That image, majestic and untouchable, was exactly the vibe they wanted: powerful, timeless, and unforgettable. They played with new tools, layered effects, global instruments like a Japanese flute, and crafted something that felt familiar but fresh.
With Meteora, there were layers to expanding the palette. Like Hybrid Theory had our first, we got 12 songs at defining the palette to you. And then one of the benefits of having a second album is to double that number, like to say, okay, cool, you understand this much about us, let us fill in a lot of gaps and add a whole bunch of other colors.
Meteora is a tapestry of tracks that delve into themes of introspection, struggle, and resilience. Somewhere I Belong serves as an anthem for those seeking a sense of place and purpose, while Breaking the Habit confronts the turmoil of addiction and self-destructive behavior.
Most importantly, you've got Breaking the Habit, which when we made that, we said we're going to do a song that's going to be dark, emotional. It's a single. It's going to be no heavy guitars. It's going to be no screaming. It's just going to be a powerful Linkin Park song. And I remember how hard we went.
So it's like, okay, we proved to everybody, like, we can make a song without traditional rock elements in it that performs well, right? That does well in the marketplace. Like, that was the part that I think was a big success for us, like, as artists.
The haunting melodies of Numb encapsulate feelings of alienation and the pressure to conform, resonating with listeners on a profound level. Each song is meticulously crafted, balancing Mike Shinoda's rap verses with Chester Bennington's emotive vocals, creating a dynamic interplay that became a hallmark of the band's sound.
I still didn't know all his stories, and he didn't know all of mine. And it's worth mentioning because later we did know each other's stories, unless it was a new story. But all the history, like I didn't have to. I'd write a thing and be like, oh, this, in 2015, I'd be like, this song is about that one time when you were a kid and this happened, and he'd be like, I love that, like, because I knew.
So cool.
But at the time of Meteora, he could tell me a story about his past, and I'd be like, oh, I didn't know that. So we write a song about it.
So you learned about each other.
One of the album's highlights is Faint, 2.5 minutes of pure adrenaline. It hits like a panic attack in Fast Forward, never letting up. Mike Shinoda fires off rapid raps while a screeching violin loop straight out of a horror movie rattles your brain. Then Chester's vocals detonate, hurling the chorus like a final ultimatum. I can't feel the way I did before. Don't turn your back on me. I won't be ignored.
I remember driving in to the studio one day and we had Faint, and the chorus of Faint was just power chords that went da 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 da. I was just kept thinking, like, I feel like this song is bigger than the shape of it right now. And I remembered having this idea as I hit the driveway at NRG Studio in North Hollywood and running into the control room, be like, you guys, can we open up Faint? Like, I have an idea. I know how to fix it. I know how to make it. They're like, we're working on this other thing. I'm like, turn it off. Shut it down. Turn on the guitars. Give me the guitar. And I changed the power chords to octaves. So they in the register of the song, they move way up in frequency. And that became like a melody. And then I put chords under it. I was like, these are the chords. And I put the chords underneath it and opened up melody underneath Chester singing. Everything was already there. Changed the whole thing, then recorded the bass over it. I think I did the bass as well. And then listened to it and everyone was like, dude, what just happened to this song? Like, it was already, we liked it. It was good. Yeah. We were like, that's one of the best songs. And to this day, I think that's still my favorite song on the record.
But it wasn't just catchy. It meant something. Faint was for anyone who ever felt talked over, shut out, or told to stay quiet. Linkin Park turned that feeling into fire, and the whole world lit up with it. One of the biggest reasons Hybrid Theory and Meteora mean so much to people who grew up with them is simple. They got what it felt like to be misunderstood, frustrated, and lost, trying to figure out the world and yourself at the same time. Sure, other bands tapped into teenage emotions too, but Linkin Park's lyrics felt real. Shinoda and Bennington didn't hide behind shock value or over-the-top drama. They wrote about everyday pain in a way that felt authentic. Even the instrumentals match that vibe, dark, moody, and intense, like the emotional roller coaster of growing up. That's why so many of us still hold these albums close. They felt like therapy. They were a lifeline, helping us feel seen and understood when we needed it most. After Meteora, the band would go on to experiment and evolve. But this record and Hybrid Theory were their emotional core. Linkin Park waited 4 years after Meteora before releasing Minutes to Midnight. And when it finally dropped, it sounded like a different band because the world had become a different place. By the mid-2000s, America felt heavy. The war in Iraq dragged on. The unity people felt after 9/11 had faded into frustration and distrust towards politicians. This was the backdrop for Linkin Park's writing. The band that once articulated personal teenage trauma now found themselves compelled to address the world on fire around them. That's why Minutes to Midnight hit different. It was their most political, most grown-up album. Even the title screamed it, a nod to the doomsday clock, humanity's countdown to collapse. Because back then, it really felt like the clock was almost out of time.
Well, it actually comes from a special I was watching on the History Channel, of all places. It happened to be about the doomsday clock.
Mm-hmm.
They kept saying like 5 minutes to midnight in whatever year, and it moves back and forth. And I just thought the idea of midnight being like the ultimate, like the end of all time, or it could be like the end of, like with the band, like the end of one era, the beginning of something new. It just felt like it really fit, and you can apply it to like all sorts of different scenarios outside of just the band. And so, we were having a really hard time naming the record. We were actually like this close to just calling it Linkin Park because we had basically nothing to work with.
Two songs in particular stand out as direct reflections of the socio-political climate, Hands Held High and No More Sorrow. These tracks saw Linkin Park stepping into the tradition of protest music, something far outside their original wheelhouse. Hands Held High is essentially a raw anti-war sermon delivered in hip-hop verse. Mike Shinoda drops his rapper persona's usual braggadocio and instead adopts a tone of sober fury, painting images of soldiers and grieving families over a minimalist beat of marching drums and churchly organ. He doesn't name names in the lyrics, but it's crystal clear he's aiming his words at the Bush administration and the Iraq conflict. In one striking couplet, Shinoda spits, "When the rich wage war, it's the poor who die," a searing line he actually borrowed from philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. This is Linkin Park in 2007, one part platinum rock band, one part fed up citizens using their platform to call out bullshit. If Hands Held High is a visceral anti-war elegy, No More Sorrow is a full-throttle protest rock anthem. Built on a heavy, grinding guitar riff and thunderous drums, the song feels like a military march turned into a headbanging purge. Chester unleashes scathing condemnation at an unnamed leader. Your crusade's a disguise, replaced freedom with fear. You trade money for lives. The album's finale, The Little Things Give You Away, is a gorgeous 6-minute slow burn that the band members have hinted was inspired by the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and the U.S. government's failure to respond adequately. The band actually visited New Orleans while writing the album, witnessing the post-Katrina devastation firsthand, and it moved them deeply. It's also crucial to highlight that in 2007, nu metal was losing steam. Instead of going down with the ship, Linkin Park reinvented themselves. But changing your sound is never easy, especially when millions of fans expect you to stay the same.
I'd love to be able to say that we, went into this album with it all figured out and we just achieved what we wanted to do, but we kind of didn't when we started. We kind of just wanted to change the sound, but retain the parts of our band's personality that we like, without this time to close the chapter on Meteor and Hybrid Theory, and we didn't know what that meant.
So they called in Rick Rubin, music's ultimate badass fixer, the guy famous for pulling artists like Johnny Cash, Beastie Boys, Slayer, and Red Hot Chili Peppers out of their graves.
The best thing about Rick is that he's a library of
musical ideas and reference points, you know. I mean, you can be writing a song that he'll say, you know, you should go listen to this band and this band and this band to inspire you for this song. And a lot of times he'll pull stuff out that he pretty much knows we haven't heard, or at least haven't listened to any time recently. And what ends up happening is you get ideas just from the vibe of, you know, different things you listen to. Not so much to like listen to it and do what they do, but more just to like get inspired by people who are making great music, you know, and doing something that's revolutionary, and that excitement translates hopefully into some good ideas.
He had so many albums that I just loved, and it took me a while. It took me definitely weeks, maybe even months to like really get comfortable working with him.
I bet.
It was fun. Like I was playing it cool, right?
But you're still out of body.
Inside
I get
I'm
it.
kind of like freaking out.
Yeah, you're a
that
total
I'm working
fan.
with
Yeah.
Rick. Yeah.
In the end, the album went multi-platinum and topped music charts worldwide. But let's be real. When this album first dropped, not everyone was happy. A lot of Linkin Park's original fans felt confused, even a little betrayed. Some critics piled on too, calling them emo sellouts. But looking back, this album became their turning point, the necessary gamble that kept them alive. Instead of becoming another nu metal band that quietly disappeared, Linkin Park stayed relevant, simply because they refused to repeat themselves. Linkin Park's next album, 1,000 Suns, changed things up again. Instead of their usual rock songs, the band created an album full of electronic beats, moody sounds, and heavy ideas about war, peace, and humanity's mistakes. It felt more like a movie soundtrack than a rock album.
We knew we wanted to make something different, like really different, and really push ourselves creatively. And, you know, I mean, we talked from the very beginnings of, you know, the process of making this album, which took 2 years to make this album. I was like, I want to make an album that makes you feel like you're on drugs. I want something that takes you out of your mind and feels like an album from beginning to end. It feels like it's got a concept. It feels like there's a story being told.
Every song bled into the next, packed with speech samples, even from civil rights icons like Mario Savio and Martin Luther King Jr., and recurring motifs of nuclear dread. Even the title draws from Oppenheimer's atomic bomb epiphany, who described its explosion as brighter than 1,000 suns.
You know, with 1,000 Suns, like, we didn't intentionally write a concept record. It kind of accidentally wrote itself. And what we found was there were connective themes, there were connective sounds, and when we put them in a specific order, it kind of told a story.
They teamed up with Rick Rubin again, who encouraged them to use their unique skills to make music no other band could, which resulted in 1,000 Suns being one of their most daring albums ever. Sure, 1,000 Suns pissed off some fans and confused a few critics, but great art should make you uncomfortable. Love it or hate it, Linkin Park refused to die quietly inside their old nu metal box. Instead, they burned that box to the ground and walked away smiling. At least they had the guts to take risks, unlike most bands who'd rather repeat themselves to death.
We really dug into classic records that we felt at the time maybe were looked at as awkward or risky, and now have become these classic records that have stood the test of time and really kind of became defining moments in the band's lives or careers. And we wanted to make our version of that record.
After the experimental odyssey of 1,000 Suns, Linkin Park's next move could have been anything, and the path they chose was a synthesis that surprised and satisfied in equal measure. Living Things, released in 2012, found the band knitting back together the disparate threads of their identity into a concentrated 37-minute attack.
It almost seems like there's like 3 or 4 different bands wrapped up into one. And so this record carries that sensibility, but we definitely tried to, bring a really high energy to all the songs, even like the kind of more textured and mid-tempo stuff.
It's as if they went out into the wilderness with 1,000 suns and returned home wiser, carrying new sonic weapons in their arsenal.
We really wanted to bring a lot of driving energy to all the songs in this record. And so we wanted the album to be fun to listen to. We wanted it to kind of be short and sweet and to the point. There's everything from folk influence to hip hop to punk rock and metal and straightforward rock all over this record. So we really brought it all together in this one album.
Thematically, Living Things turned inward again, shifting from global to personal matters.
There's a theme about being human that runs through all of the songs on this record. And so, whereas 1,000 Suns was really kind of a dark, digital, apocalyptic point of view of the world, on not only a personal level, but also a very social level, we really dealt with just the human stuff on this record. And so Living Things, I think, is an appropriate title for the themes.
Musically, Living Things comes out swinging. The opening track, Lost in the Echo, immediately marries skittering electronic beats and glossy synths with a huge screaming chorus, almost rubbing our faces in the album's genre meld from the get-go. From there, the record pinballs between throwbacks and fresh twists. Old school fans hungry for aggression get their fix on Victimized, 90 seconds of punked up rap metal brutality that evokes the band's early ferocity, and on the fiery shouts of Lies, Greed, Misery. At the same time, the band explores slick electro-pop touches, Burn It Down pulses with a danceable groove, and neon keyboards, even as its lyrics deliver an anti-war sentiment, and Castle of Glass merges folk-like fragility with digital ambience. Throughout Living Things, scream-heavy guitar anthems sit alongside dubstep drops and ambient detours, often within the same song. It's a bracing mix that somehow remains cohesive.
And I always tell people it's like a left brain and right brain experience for us when we're making the record. Like there's the creative side and the logical side of your brain. And when we're making an album, they're always like kind of like in trying to find balance. Like I want the craziest, most like interesting creative ideas to just pop out. But at the same time, I also want the time to like craft the songs and make something hopefully like sophisticated and smart to the best of our abilities as a bunch of idiots. And sometimes
if 1,000 Suns was a single sprawling soundscape, Living Things was the band refining their songcraft again, giving each track its own punch. The album is tighter and more accessible for sure, but it doesn't feel like a retreat so much as a recalibration.
I think it's a good, comprehensive blend of where we've been over the last 10 years, and also our look towards the future.
Fittingly, the next move after Living Things was yet another sharp turn. 2014's The Hunting Party, a bruising guitar-heavy onslaught that deliberately swung the pendulum back to raw rock.
Each record we approach, we just try to approach it fresh and try to be as different as we can to challenge ourselves and not repeat things that we always do. Throughout the process, songs get refined and every band member touches it in a different way, and then it ultimately becomes what Linkin Park is.
Rick Rubin was nowhere in sight on this album. Notably, it was Linkin Park's first studio record since 2003, not produced under Rubin's guidance. Freed from any outside guru, the band took the reins themselves, with Mike Shinoda and guitarist Brad Delson producing. Rubin's absence wasn't so much celebrated as simply a sign that Linkin Park were operating purely on their own terms. and on their own terms, they went hard.
I think people were really expecting us to go further into the EDM side and further into pushing the pop side of what we're doing. And so for us, I think even that was the direction that we were kind of feeling like we were gravitating towards. And at a certain point, it was like, we don't know if that's what we want to do. Let's move somewhere else. And then, I didn't even know that that was what we wanted to do until it was brought up by Mike, or, it was somebody else comes in and goes, here's a song, and all of a sudden we're inspired. It inspires us, That kind of process happens all the time. So we're never really not writing. We're never really not moving forward.
If Minutes to Midnight and 1,000 Suns had shunned heavy guitars, the Hunting Party welcomed guitar heroes from the band's inspirations.
The music that we grew up on, that we listened to before we ever made Hybrid Theory, was music that sounded like this.
Page Hamilton of Helmet brings bruising vocals and riff muscle to All for Nothing, for example. Then you have Darren Malakian of System of a Down, who shreds at toxic speeds on Rebellion.
Darren was exceptional too.
Mike,
Darren, he's just such a great songwriter. He has such a great flavor, like the flavor that he comes with when he writes a song is so cool. And then I know that once we started singing on it, it was like, whoa, this is now like not like him and it's not like us. It's kind of got its own thing. That song is called Rebellion.
And Tom Morello lends an uncharacteristically atmospheric guitar texture to the instrumental drawbar, trading his usual fireworks for a moody vibe. Chester's vocals on The Hunting Party swing from throat-shredding screams to melodic hooks, a dynamic fury that only someone who's been through real darkness can summon on cue. In a world where rock had been declared dead more times than anyone could count, Linkin Park's aggressive revival was largely welcomed as a bold move. But when it came to actual sales, the story wasn't as simple. In the summer of 2014, Linkin Park's loud, angry comeback album got beat out by pop stars like Lana Del Rey and Sam Smith. Turns out catchy hooks and love songs still ruled the charts. Which takes us to One More Light, released in May 2017, tragically marking Linkin Park's final album with Chester. Fittingly, at the heart of this album is the emotional honesty and vulnerability of Chester himself. One More Light may have been draped in pop textures, but thematically it is one of Linkin Park's darkest, most painfully honest works. Largely because Chester opened up like never before.
When it's over, it's in your head.
And what I love about the record is how dark the lyrics are, but kind of how in opposition the music is very, we're using a lot of more uplifting chord progressions. And we had a lot of fun creating all the different sounds that you hear on the record.
During the making of the album, he was wrestling with heavy personal issues, depression, a relapse into alcoholism, and multiple life crises all at once.
My whole life I've just kind of felt a little off, and I find myself like getting into these patterns of like behavior or thought, and especially when I'm like stuck up here, I like to say that like this is like I heard somebody say this once and it like stuck with me, but this is like a bad neighborhood, you know what I mean? And I should not go walking alone.
Chester's creative leadership in this era was notable. Whereas in early Linkin Park albums, Mike Shinoda often took charge of songwriting and conceptual direction, One More Light saw Chester pouring more of his own soul and story into the lyrics. He even wrote from perspectives outside his own, showing a new maturity. The track, Talking to Myself, is written as if his wife is speaking to him, a poignant exercise in empathy and self-reflection. It chronicles what it's like for loved ones to watch him struggle. That kind of perspective, stepping outside of his own spiral to imagine the collateral damage, was something new, and it took Linkin Park's lyrical depth to a higher level. He was effectively holding up a mirror to his own destructive behavior and doing so in the most intimate way possible through music.
I don't know if anybody out there can relate, but like, I have a hard time with life sometimes. Right. Sometimes it's great, but a lot of times for me, it's really hard. And no matter how I'm feeling, like, I always find myself like struggling with certain patterns of behavior. I find myself like stuck in like the same thing that keeps repeating over and over again. And I'm just like, how am I in this?
Indeed, Chester's performances on songs like One More Light and Sharp Edges are disarmingly heartfelt. No screams, just the pure, plaintive tone of a man bearing his soul. Even the much maligned Heavy features Chester delivering lines about holding on to so much more than I can carry, with such genuine ache that, if you strip away the glossy production, it's as gut-wrenching as any scream. This was a different kind of heavy, an emotional heaviness that didn't need distorted guitars to crush you. Chester was fearless in his vulnerability, and that became the shining achievement of One More Light. However, when the album finally dropped, the backlash from a segment of Linkin Park's fan base was swift and harsh. Some fans felt betrayed that they had effectively made a pop album with tender ballads and radio bait choruses.
It's like they're trying too hard to appeal to a generation of listeners who it's just not going to happen. It's never going to happen. All you're going to do is alienate and tick off the listeners who have stuck with you from back in the day. And believe me, at this point, you want those people to continue riding with you. You don't want to shake that boat. You don't want to kick them off the bus, because they're going to leave if you come out with another album like this. They're going to go.
Chester was hurting. The negative reception really bothered him, according to his close friend Sean Dowdle. It's a cruel irony. The same album on which he was working through his depression and reaching out for connection was met with toxic backlash that only added to his burden. One More Light was intended as a sincere offering, and to have that thrown back at him with accusations of sellout must have felt like a personal attack. This whole chapter was messy and emotionally charged. After nearly 2 decades in the game, Linkin Park still couldn't catch a break, damned for changing and damned if they hadn't.
We've always been like too hard rock for pop and too pop for hard rock, and we kind of have been a band that like, for me, represents how I feel. Like, I'm always just kind of like a little bit off.
Then, the unthinkable happened. On July 20th, 2017, just 2 months after One More Light was released, Chester Bennington took his own life.
Chester Bennington was just 41, the lead vocalist for Linkin Park for nearly 2 decades, an extraordinary singer-songwriter, and fans are now pointing to his own lyrics for clues about that personal struggle.
In an instant, every lyric on One More Light turned into a gut-punching reminder of the singer's inner battles. The album that had been controversially received suddenly became, in the cruelest twist of fate, a haunting farewell. Lines from the tracks, Heavy and One More Light, that some had scorned as melodramatic or simplistic, now rang with prophetic sadness. I don't like my mind right now. Who cares if One More Light goes out? Well, I do. Listening back, many fans found themselves in tears, hearing the album with new ears and deep regret. In September 2017, the surviving members released a beautiful montage music video for the song One More Light, comprised of footage of Chester in happy moments on tour. In death, Chester's final artistic statement was vindicated. This had been all along an album about empathy, connection, and the value of every life. It became a cornerstone of Linkin Park's legacy, representing the band's capacity to channel pain into art of healing. Linkin Park's final arc with Chester, from the blistering revolt of the hunting party to the vulnerable outreach of One More Light, redefined what the band stood for. It's fitting that their last two albums were polar opposites. Contradiction was always in Linkin Park's DNA, after all. This was a band that started by merging rap and metal, that topped charts with screaming metal anthems, then dared to go experimental, then hardcore, then pop, never sitting still. Looking back now, these albums encapsulate the complete Linkin Park, the headbangers and the healers, the rebels and the reflectors. It's a legacy that resists easy categorization, just as Chester would have wanted. In the end, Chester's final bow was not a loud one, but it was profoundly resonant. Their music, heavy or soft, aggressive or pop, remains a testament to the power of authenticity. It's a reminder that rock stars can be heroes on stage and still hurt underneath, and that there is immense courage in embracing change and emotion. Linkin Park's story is ultimately a story of evolution and empathy, and that may be the most important legacy they could have.